Hi there, and welcome to Physically Debunked. My name is Matt, and I'm a PhD student in cosmology, which means that my job is basically to sit and think about the universe. I simply love all things physics, maths, and philosophy related, and spend a lot of my time reading and writing about new theories and ideas, which are usually completely irrelevant to my actual work. If you don't know already, I usually post under the moniker The Platonic Realm, and you can find me on Twitter or on my blog using the links below. Anywho, apart from being a bit of a science nerd, I also like to get quite involved in debates about the big questions. And arguably the biggest question of them all is there a God? I'll break it to you now. I'm an atheist, and one of the things I find most annoying are theists who claim to have irrefutable logical proof for God's existence, when actually their argument isn't particularly good at all. This is what this channel, Physically Debunked, is for. I'm so sick and tired of seeing YouTube videos titled Theist Destroys Atheism with Irrefutable Logical Proof, and seeing these go relatively unchallenged. What I want to do is run through these videos and show you where these simple irrefutable proofs go wrong. Without further ado, the first clip I want to look at is a video of the Muslim author and public speaker Hamza Tzortzis, who you may have seen before debating fairly well-known atheists like Lawrence Krauss. The clip's name is Muslim Destroys Atheism, Logical Proof for God. On a closer inspection, you'll see just how weak and flimsy Hamza's argument actually is.
See, this is the thing, right? Because we're born in the West, in Britain.
Yeah.
Religion gets attacked all the time. You have Richard Dawkins. You've heard of Richard Dawkins, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I call him Richard Dawkins, yeah?
How can Richard Dawkins ever come back from that?
Do you believe you had a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma?
No.
Do you believe
I
you had
mean, yeah, but I mean, there's obviously, I know that because obviously
Why?
I'm here now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but that's exactly the point. Have you ever seen your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma? You don't have access to a DNA?
I know
a
scientifically, I would have to have one to be here.
How, well, I don't know. See, that's the point. Using the terminology here. Scientifically, you have no clue.
Scientifically, you have no clue. You have a great-great-grandmother.
You have no clue. Scientifically, you're just dumb on this position. Or we're dumb on this position because what does science say? Science say we can only verify the physical world and things that we can touch and feel. This is a non-verifiable thing.
Yeah.
The only way you know you got a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma is because you're here. You've made a logical, rational decision. Not based on the physical world, based on necessity.
Okay, let's stop there. There's so many things wrong with this reasoning. Hamza is claiming that you only know you have a great-great-grandmother by necessity, and that this deduction has nothing to do with the physical world. There's simply no way you can argue that you have to have a great-great-grandmother from logical necessity alone. This is because there's no logical contradiction between the statements I exist and I don't have a great-great-grandmother. You can see this most clearly by considering how it would be possible for you to exist without having a great-great-grandmother. Consider a human being grown entirely in a laboratory. Or consider the very first organism on Earth. Neither of these things have great-great-grandmothers, but that doesn't mean they can't exist, which means that just because you exist, you can't conclude that you have a great-great-grandmother by logical necessity alone. The real reason we know that we have great-great-grandmothers is because of biology, because of science. It has nothing to do with logical necessity. From our understanding of biology, we know that people naturally have parents, and their parents have parents, and so people have great-great-grandmothers. This, coupled with our knowledge that the chances of you being created in a laboratory are fairly low, which again comes from our experience of the physical world, means we can conclude with high confidence that we do have great-great-grandmothers. You may never be able to touch or see or feel your great-great-grandmother, but that doesn't mean that the belief that we have one doesn't come from our experience of the physical world.
If it's necessary your great-great-great-great-grandmother existed in order for you to be here. You can't see her, but if someone says she never existed, you say, get lost, man, you're crazy. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
So the point is, we don't need physical evidence all the time to come to conclusions.
I do actually want to say a few words about this here, because this seems to be an idea that people have about how science actually works. Science isn't just about what we can touch and see and feel. At the end of the day, the evidence for our scientific theories does come from experiments which we can see and touch and feel. But science is not just a list of every experiment and every result we've ever done. No, data from scientific experiments lead to the construction of theories. These theories are logical frameworks of facts and relationships that we can use to predict the results of further experiments, or tell us about things that we can't touch or see or feel. Until recently, we'd never seen or touched or felt a black hole. But we knew they had to be there because the theoretical framework of general relativity told us that they formed from collapsing stars. In the same way, we can't ever touch or see or feel our great-great-grandmothers, but from our biological theories, which are backed up by empirical data, we can deduce that we all probably have them.
Everything in the universe, dude, that begins to exist, okay, if I just popped like this, here I am, I just popped into existence, has a cause. You know it must have came from somewhere. Everything that begins, that starts to exist, always has a cause.
I think it was clear as soon as he started talking about grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers that the cosmological argument was going to come up. For those who haven't seen this argument before, it's a commonly cited argument in favour of God's existence. It has two premises and one conclusion, and it goes roughly like this. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And the conclusion, the universe began to exist, therefore it must have a cause. Theists then go on to reason that this cause must be immaterial, outside the universe, omnipotent, and so basically God. We'll get to this stuff later. For now, let's just take a look at the first premise. I understand why people think this is simply an irrefutable logical fact. It works so well as an assumption in day-to-day life. But when we try applying this idea to the universe as a whole, you end up in a universe of trouble. Based on all the great-great-grandmother stuff that came up earlier, what I think Hamza wants to say is that cause and effect is a purely logical relation. If you have an effect, then by pure logical necessity, you must have a cause as well. What you need to ask yourself is, where does our belief in cause and effect come from? This question was one that the great Scottish philosopher David Hume was concerned about, and his conclusion was that the only possible source of our knowledge for cause and effect is the physical world. We believe in cause and effect because we constantly see events occurring in conjunction with one another. Far from being a logical relation, our intuition behind cause and effect comes purely from our experience of the physical world and how it evolves through time. In a timeless universe with no change, any concept of cause and effect makes very little sense. The point here then is that far from Hamza's implication that cause and effect is just necessary logic, he's actually relying on a principle derived from our experience of the physical world. To understand then whether the first premise is actually true, we need to observe the world around us and verify whether it's true or not. At first glance, it's easy to see why our intuition says it's true. When we observe the ordinary world around us, we see that this premise makes sense. A chair begins to exist because a carpenter assembled it. You exist because your parents did the thing. So looking at the everyday world, the premise seems fine. If we want to test the premise out on a more fundamental level, then we need to start considering the physics of the microscopic world. When we do this, however, the premise starts to seem quite shaky. In quantum field theory, virtual particles pop out of the vacuum seemingly without obvious cause. In radioactive isotopes, the decay of the nuclei does follow a probabilistic law, but there's no obvious cause for why a specific nucleus at a specific time decays when it does. On a microscopic scale, then, the first premise isn't looking so good. On the other hand, our universe is big and huge, so maybe this isn't an issue. Maybe the law of cause and effect does apply to the universe as a whole. The problem here is that every instance we've ever observed of causation occurs within time and occurs within the universe. The universe as a whole, however, is not located in time and is not contained within itself. What this means is that there's no good reason to assume that our causal reasoning will apply to the universe just as well as it applies to everyday objects around us. Even if it did, though, we know from the Big Bang Theory that at some point in our universe's past, it was very, very small, which means the concerns we had about the first premise applying to the microscopic world then applies to the universe at its beginning. In any case, the first premise of the cosmological argument, that everything that begins to exist must have a cause, is not obviously true when we consider more fundamental theories of physics.
Number 2, the universe, without a shadow of a doubt now, began to exist. Based on philosophy, mathematics, Big Bang. You know about the Big Bang, yeah?
Yeah.
There's a huge shadow of a doubt about this. This is actually a bit of a misinterpretation of the Big Bang Theory that I don't think has been explained to the public particularly well. The way cosmologists usually explain the Big Bang to non-scientists is that the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe. But this isn't necessarily true. All the Big Bang Theory tells us is that about 13.7 billion years ago, the laws of physics as we know them break down because the observable universe is crushed down into a tiny singularity. We simply don't know if there's actually a beginning. It may well be the case that there was a lot more to the universe before the Big Bang. The problem is that our laws of physics simply aren't developed enough to consider moments close to or even before the singularity. There are all sorts of proposals for extensions to the Big Bang model. There's a cyclical universe, there's eternal inflation, multiverse. It simply isn't the case that we definitely know the universe had a beginning. What the Big Bang does tell us is that the universe hasn't always existed in the state that we find it in now. That's the real take-home message of the Big Bang.
So from all this, we know the universe began to exist. So what logically follows? Therefore, the universe has a cause.
If the premises were true, then the conclusion would certainly follow. There's little doubt about that. But far from being a simple, logical proof for God's existence that destroys atheism, it's very doubtful that the premises are actually true.
So we just say, right, without a doubt we know that the universe has a cause. What is the nature of this cause? Well, if you create the universe, it can't be part of the universe. Because if it's part of the universe, then that would mean the universe existed and didn't exist at the same time.
Madness.
Does that make sense?
No.
That's just crazy.
Madness.
Can Abu Bakr exist and not exist at the same time?
Don't make no
Although
sense.
we may want him not to exist. Because he talks a lot, yeah. Yeah, I'm only kidding. So there's that. It must be one. Because they're knocking on the door. We don't assume there's Manchester United football team behind the door, right? We say it's one person, isn't it? Yeah.
What? If you hear a knock on your door, then there's nothing that logically rules out there being more than one person behind the door. So there isn't good reason to suspect that if the universe did have a cause, that it was a single cause alone.
It's the most logical explanation. We know it must be all-powerful. He didn't create a grain of sand, he created the whole universe, right?
Yeah.
There's no logical necessity that the creator has to be all-powerful, even if that term was well defined. Perhaps you could make a case that this creator would have unlimited power over the universe he created, but that doesn't mean the creator necessarily has to be able to do anything at all. The creator could be bound by the laws of logic or the laws of mathematics, for example. Presumably this creator would be bound by the law of non-contradiction.
And we know it must be uncreated. Because some people say, well, who created God? It must be uncreated. Why?
Don't know why.
But let me give you an example. Say I want to shoot you, yeah?
Yeah.
Good style like this, yeah? Yeah? Hackney style. But before I could shoot, I have to ask Abu Bakr for permission. Abu Bakr, can I shoot the geezer? He says, wait, I need to ask someone behind me to shoot. And that guy has to ask permission too. If that goes on forever, could I shoot you?
No.
Impossible.
Exactly the same thing with the universe. The question of saying who created God is equivalent of saying there is no creation. Because you need a final point. Because if it went on forever, we would never have creation in the first place.
There's also no logical necessity that the cause of the universe itself has to be uncaused. If a creator is the only thing that's uncaused, then it's just an ad hoc assumption. Notice here that in Hamza's attempt to show that infinite regressive causes is problematic, he uses an example that is only impossible if one exists in time. The guy can never get shot because there is no time or no finite time at which the chain will have completed and the guy can shoot. But if we're talking about a cause for the entire universe, then we're talking about things that probably don't exist in time. So there's no reason to reject an infinite regressive causes because time here wouldn't be an issue. What Hamza seems to be assuming here is that there can't be an actual infinity of things. But if this really worked, then he would be proving that integers couldn't exist, the normal numbers.
So we come to the conclusion that there must be a God. For me, I think that's irrefutable evidence there.
All in all, I think that was really quite refutable. If I were to give that argument a rating, I'd give it the Swiss cheese, full of holes. Thank you very much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed and found it insightful. Please like and subscribe if you want me to take on and debunk more arguments for God's existence. Bye for now.